Hey, friends. Tonight, we drift back through the hush of centuries to a world of candlelit corridors, dirt roads slick with rain, and whispers behind stone walls. We're leaving behind the soft glow of our screens, the quick text messages, the modern swirl of romance that feels so easy, or at least less perilous than it once was. Instead, imagine yourself stepping into the narrow alleyways and smoky hearthrooms of the medieval world, a time when choosing a partner was rarely just about love. There's no rush here, only the slow rhythm of footsteps on muddy roads, the hush of wind through thatched eaves, the distant call of an evening bell. You may find your thoughts drifting off as we go, and that's just fine. We'll explore where couples met, how they spoke without words, how alliances were bargained in whispers and dowries counted like precious grain. Tonight, we'll wander through these old streets and crooked halls, tracing how people lived under the constant watchful eyes of their families, their neighbors, and the ever-watchful church. Like an old village lane, you can wander down again and again, quiet, patient, and filled with the gentle echoes of lives long past. A world where the wrong word could ruin a family's honor, and where even stolen glances came with heavy risk. Let your eyes grow heavy as you listen. And if you should fall asleep before we reach the end, know that the stories will still be here waiting. So settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and join me as we explore why dating, if we can even call it that, was often less about romance and more a waking nightmare in the world of the Middle Ages. Before we get started, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these sleepy, strange history trips. And feel free to let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always oddly comforting to know who else is lying in the dark, drifting with us through the layers of time. Imagine yourself rising early in a village that still slumbers beneath a soft gray sky. The air smells faintly of damp earth and last night's embers drifting from stone chimneys. The thatched cottages lean together as if sharing secrets. You walk past the smithy, where the blacksmith's hammer rings out a steady rhythm, each blow echoing through the dawn mist. The village green waits for the bustle of market day. Stalls will creak under the weight of turnips, salted fish, and coarse wool. And always there is the press of family and neighbors, the constant hum of watchful eyes. These everyday places, the well, the churchyard, the bakehouse, are where you might first catch a glance or share a shy greeting. Each footstep is heavy with duty and light with the secret hope that perhaps a glance or greeting might grow into something more. If the gossip spares you, if your families approve, if you're lucky enough that your dowry and your name fit neatly together, constant rhythm of life, and the weight of all who stand ready to judge you if you stray too far. Chickens rustle in their roosts. A few sheep bleat drowsily in the pasture beyond the crooked wooden fence. You pull your cloak tighter against the morning chill and step carefully onto the well-worn path that snakes through your world. Here, the village gathers every Sunday, men on one side, women on the other, all eyes discreetly studying who sits near whom, who shares a hymn book, whose gaze lingers a fraction too long. The priest, too, keeps watch. A pair caught too close behind the churchyard wall may soon find themselves called before the moral courts, forced to wed or shamed for the sin of a stolen kiss. In this medieval village, life breathes close. Every creaking door and whispered word becomes part of the fabric of rumor and reputation. There are no lavish ballrooms here, no candlelit dinners for two men. Courtship is threaded through the daily grind of survival. You spot the miller's daughter balancing a basket of grain on her hip, eyes downcast, but lashes flicking upward just once as the carpenter's apprentice passes her by. A smile must be hidden like a coin. A conversation must be short enough to seem accidental, but long enough to spark 1,000 whispers later. And maidens chase each other through hayfields, harvest feasts where ale flows more freely than caution. Such moments offer a thin sliver of freedom, a chance for a hand to brush against another in the half-dark, for an exchange of garlands, or a hastily carved wooden token passed beneath a cloak. You pause at the church door, its heavy oak worn smooth by generations of hands. The seasons shape these small possibilities. A May Day dance on the village green, ribbons bright against the mud. The midsummer fair, where lads yet for most, the day returns to chores, hauling water, tending sheep, grinding grain. There is little time for moonlit strolls or lingering words, so you walk on, imagining the villagers in their patched cloaks and muddy boots, tracing paths across the village green. In this place, love begins in muddy lanes and drafty church naves shaped not by candlelit vows, but by the quiet. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of that same village green as the sun climbs higher, chasing away the damp chill. The ordinary day unfolds. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the low murmur of women at the well, the rustle of hens pecking near the churchyard wall. A young woman's future was shaped by her father's ambitions and the thin threads of family honor. A young man's choices were measured against the family's plot of land, the promise of livestock, or a tiny scrap of inheritance. Courtship was less about the flutter in one's chest and more about a careful balancing act of custom, consent, and control. Beneath this simple surface, a quiet maze of rules hums along, invisible yet binding, a rumor of unchaste behavior, a hand held too long in the shadows, a cloak draped around shoulders on a frosty evening could be enough to send tongues wagging. Widows with property became pawns in marriage negotiations, their land a prize for ambitious families. Picture a young couple exchanging coded tokens, a kerchief knotted with ribbon, a pressed flower hidden in a prayer book. But in the end, the rules reasserted themselves. Parents bargained behind closed doors. Villagers talked in low voices by the hearth. The priest reminded all that marriage was holy, binding, and necessary for the order of things. There they'll dream, perhaps, of small freedoms, quiet rebellions, and a match made for more than land or cows or a father's pride. A promise might be whispered in the hush of confession, the only place a young woman could speak without her mother hovering nearby. Every hushed word might be repeated in the weaving shed or the alehouse. To love freely is to risk everything, the good name that keeps a family's standing intact, the precious dowry that might secure your future, the fragile trust that holds your place in the parish. Lovers carved initials into tree trunks on the edge of a lord's forest, the marks soon overgrown by ivy, but never quite forgotten. Even noble families lived under these constraints, though for them the stakes were lands and alliances that could shape kingdoms, and the gossip did not fade quietly. A woman seen as too bold might find herself unmarriageable. A man accused of seducing a maiden without marrying her could face public penance, a fine, or a forced wedding performed in shame. In the Middle Ages, your heart did not belong only to you. Family was not a distant overseer, but a constant presence. Brothers, sisters, aunts, and uncles might share a single smoky hall. A secret tryst was never truly secret. An older sister might whisper a warning in the dark. Mind your tongue, keep your distance, don't bring shame to our door. A mother might remind her daughter that a misplaced glance could see her reputation shredded by gossip before the next dawn. Imagine the matchmaker, too. Sometimes a village elder, sometimes a cunning neighbor who made herself useful with knowledge of everyone's secrets. She might carry coded messages between families, hinting at a possible match. She'd know how much land came with a bride, or whether a groom's father drank too much ale and gambled away the cows. A good matchmaker could make a family's fortune. A poor one could ruin it with a whispered lie. Church laws added another layer of watchfulness. The church insisted that marriage be entered freely, at least in theory. Yet for many, freedom was an illusion. Betrothals were often arranged when children were barely old enough to carry water jugs to the well. Promises were made years in advance, sealed with gifts, prayers, and the ever-watchful eyes of the priest. To break such a promise was to risk scandal, excommunication, or worse, being deemed untrustworthy by the entire parish. Consider, too, the many small ways reputation could turn. In towns, the rules only grew more complex. Guilds might restrict whom an apprentice could marry until he finished his years of service. And yet, within these rigid lines, human hearts still found ways to wander. These secret gestures could mean everything or nothing. For a moment they felt like rebellion, a small freedom stolen from the web of custom and control. So you stand there, in this imagined village, hearing the faint echo of these rules. Every stolen glance is weighed. As the sun begins to dip behind the cottages, the village settles into its old hush again. Chores done, rumors traded, and young lovers slipping back to their places by the hearth. And in that dream, the old rules sleep too, but only until dawn. Imagine, now, the slow wheel of the seasons turning, the plowing of fields, the gathering of harvests, the hush of winter nights, thick with smoke and story. In these simple cycles, brief moments of color and music break through the drudgery. For all their rules and watchful eyes, even the most cautious village had its festivals. Picture May Day at dawn. The morning air shivers with mist as villagers gather on the green, cheeks pink from the cold. Maidens weave garlands of hawthorn and ribbons, winding them into the great maypole that stands tall, its colors fluttering like a banner of defiance against the gloom. Lads, their shirts brushed clean for once, glance sideways at the girls' bright braids, laughter catching in their throats like birds too shy to fly. There is music, fiddles, pipes, and the steady beat of a borrowed drum. It isn't grand, but it is enough. The dancing begins, weaving young men and women around each other in patterns older than anyone can name. Hands touch by custom, by ritual, and each fleeting brush sends a ripple of excitement, a tiny rebellion against the day-to-day rules. An exchanged glance, here, a ribbon tugged loose there. Even the elders, arms crossed at the edge of the green, know that this is part of the dance, too. Later in the year, after the wheat has been gathered and the barley threshed, there are harvest feasts. Long trestle tables sag under the weight of meat pies, loaves dark with coarse flour, and pitchers of ale that loosen tongues and lower the careful walls people build around their hearts. By candlelight, stories grow bolder. A widow might find herself courted anew, her fields a prize worth a well-rehearsed poem and a hopeful hand on hers. A shepherd's son might dare to ask the blacksmith's daughter for a dance that spins them into the shadows behind the barn. But always, these moments are borrowed. A candle flicker in the vast darkness of duty and decorum. Lovers, if they are brave or reckless enough, might slip away after the dancing. Picture them stealing through the orchard, boots crunching frostbitten grass, breath clouding in the moonlight. They find each other behind a stack of firewood or beneath the low branches of an old oak. Their promises are whispered, futures imagined. But every rustle in the underbrush could be the eyes of a neighbor, or worse, a brother with a staff in hand to guard the family name. For some, these secret meetings are the beginning of something real, a promise that, if the families approve, may be blessed by the church and sealed by the parish priest. For others, they are the seeds of scandal that grow quickly in the tangled soil of gossip. A girl who returns home with straw in her hair may find her dowry suddenly worth less than before. A boy accused of stealing virtue might be dragged before the manor court, forced to wed, or fined so deeply that his apprenticeship ends before it begins. Beyond the village, the great fairs offer another fragile chance. Imagine traveling to the edge of a market town during a saint's feast, tents bright with penance, the air alive with the bray of animals and the shout of merchants. Here, for a few days, young people mingle among strangers, faces half hidden by the swirl of travelers and tradesmen. A silversmith's son from one village might catch the eye of a brewer's daughter from another, their paths crossing in the busy crush between stalls of ribbons and honeycakes. Such meetings might bloom into love, or wilt under the suspicion of parents who fear a union that brings no good land or coin. And sometimes, though rarely, a tryst becomes a flight to souls, desperate to escape the tangle of family and duty, vanish together into the forests or distant towns. The stories tell of lovers who fled under moonlight, married by wandering priests, living out the rest of their days as outcasts or heroes, depending on who tells the tale. But for every tale that ends in freedom, countless others end in capture, disgrace, or a forced return to the very rules they tried to escape. So when you imagine these festivals, these bright, brief whirlwinds of music and secret meetings, remember the risk woven into every ribbon. A single dance could shift a family's future. A single kiss could echo through the whispers of neighbors, the sermons of priests, the ledger books where dowries were tallied like harvest grain. And yet, year after year, the fiddles play, the maypoles rise, young hearts circle each other in the dusk, and in the flicker of torchlight and song, they steal what freedom they can, before the cold dawn comes to sweep them back into the rigid lanes of duty, name, and kin. Now, imagine the music of the festivals fading away, the ribbons taken down, the garlands withering in the corner of a cottage hearth. The hush that follows the dancing is heavy with the real work of courtship in the medieval world, the quiet, relentless bargaining that shaped who would marry whom. In this world, marriage is less a private vow and more a contract, a binding promise of land, livestock, or labor. Imagine a father sitting at a rough-hewn table, a single beeswax candle flickering low, parchment spread before him. A mother stands nearby, arms folded, eyes watchful. They weigh the future, not in kisses and poems, but in acres and coins. A daughter's worth is tallied in the threads she can spin, the animals she brings with her, the alliances she might secure. Picture a young woman, perhaps the same girl who danced so freely at the May Day festival. Now she kneels by the hearth, listening to the murmurs behind the door. Her heart might yearn for the carpenter's apprentice, the one whose hand brushed hers in the orchard. But the words behind the door speak instead of the miller's son. 2 villages over a boy she's spoken to only twice, but whose father owns a field that could double her family's harvest. Love slips quiet as a mouse beneath the rushes when there is land at stake. Sometimes these arrangements come with little warning. Betrothals are made when children are still children, barely grown enough to fetch water or pluck chickens. A promise, sealed with a handshake or a token ring, exchanged beneath the eyes of the village priest, becomes law in the eyes of the church. To break it would be a scandal, whispered about for generations, a black mark on a family's good name. For wealthier folk, the stakes grow even higher. In manors and keeps, marriage becomes an outright transaction, alliances to bind families, estates, and entire regions together. A young lord might find himself wed at 16 to a girl of 12, their union not their own, but arranged by fathers, more interested in keeping lands intact than hearts unbroken. The wedding feast might be splendid, boar's head, spiced wine, minstrels playing soft under the vaulted roof, but beneath the velvet and gold there is little romance to be found. Sometimes, though, there is gentle hope even in these arrangements. A match that benefits both families might, with time, blossom into something warmer. 2 strangers sit side by side each night at the same hearth, sharing bread, bearing children, weathering bad harvests together. The rhythm of shared struggle can smooth the edges of what began as a bargain struck by others. It is not the poetry of troubadours, but it is a love that grows sturdy as an old oak. Yet for many, the pressure is unyielding. Imagine the poor cottager, whose daughter is of age, but whose fields are meager, whose flock has dwindled from sickness or wolves. She must marry well, or the family might not survive the next harsh winter. A girl in such a place may find herself given to an older widower, his first wife, long buried, his need for heirs outweighing any concern for her tender age. No festival dance can soften that reality, and so the villages hum with these bargains. Some whispered in corners, some shouted across wooden tables. A father might barter his daughter for a promised share in a plow team. A mother might sweeten the deal with a chest of linen spun by her own hand. A young man might marry not for the curve of a cheek, but for the plot of barley field that comes with it. Even so, secret hopes flutter where they can. Some couples find small mercies in the shadows of these deals, a match that is not cruel, a partner who is kind. But for every quiet kindness, there is a broken promise, a betrothal made and broken by greed or rumor. There are tales of brides left waiting at the church door, the bargain undone by a sudden death or a better offer. And always the watchful eyes of the village ensure that no scandal goes unnoticed. So you can almost hear it, the rustle of parchment, the clink of coins, the hushed arguments behind the shuttered window. In this world, love is a ledger as much as a dream. And when the dawn breaks over the thatched rooftops, it is not the glow of candlelight poetry that remains, but the hard lines drawn by ink, family, and the soil itself. And yet, still, the hearts within these bargains beat on, hopeful, fearful, always waiting for a soft glance or a kind word that might turn a nightmare of duty into the small warmth of companionship. For even when arranged, even when bargained, sometimes love finds a way to breathe between the lines. Now, imagine the hush of a small, dim chamber, the fire-banked low rushlights flickering somewhere behind the thick timber of a cottage door or the cold stone of a manor hall. A young heart dares to send out a message for all the rigid rules and careful bargains. There were always secret ways for people to speak the language of longing. In an age when many could not read or write, love letters were often dictated, carried by a trusted friend, or even whispered to a priest who might, under the cloak of confession, act as a quiet messenger. A village lad might scratch a few clumsy lines into a scrap of parchment ink made from oak galls, quill sharpened with shaking fingers. He might ask the miller's boy to slip it beneath a cottage door in the blue hush before dawn. Imagine the words, stiff, simple, yet aching with hope. I think on you at sunrise and at dusk. Or perhaps just a single line, meet me by the hedgerow at moonrise. In these clumsy marks lay all the risk of ruin if the wrong eyes found them. The letter could be read aloud in the alehouse, mocked, or brought before the manor court as evidence of a promise never meant to be made. But letters were not the only tokens of longing. Picture a kerchief embroidered in secret hours by the glow of a rush lamp, a slender ribbon stolen from a hair braid hidden in the fold of a cloak, a simple ring carved from wood or bone, passed from hand to trembling hand during a chance meeting behind the churchyard wall, even a sprig of rosemary or a pressed flower slipped inside a prayer. Book could speak volumes to the one who found it. Such symbols were not empty gestures. In some places, they could bind a promise as surely as a spoken betrothal. To accept a ring was to risk your good name if the giver proved false. To wear a ribbon at a festival was to say, my heart leans this way, even if your family's plans leaned elsewhere. These tokens traveled quietly under aprons, inside purses, tucked into the hems of tunics. They smelled of home, of rushes, and hearth smoke, the faint sweetness of lavender sachets tucked into chests. A girl might trace the stitching on a love kerchief each night before sleep, praying it would protect her secret until the day her father's bargaining came to an end. A boy might keep a ribbon close to his skin as he swung his scythe through fields of barley, the scratch of cloth against his wrist, reminding him that he was not alone in his longing. Sometimes such tokens turned into true unions, a promise exchanged. Behind the hedgerow might, with luck, find its way to the altar, the whispered words spoken again, this time before priest and kin, the ring replaced by one of silver if the family could afford it. But often these fragile hopes were trampled by duty. A token discovered by a brother or father could be torn apart, the ribbon burned in the hearth, the flower ground underfoot like a lie. A letter might be read aloud as proof of a girl's shame or a boy's empty promises, and yet people still risked it. For what else could they do? Beneath the clatter of daily chores, the bleating sheep, the tolling of the church bell, the human heart still beat out its secret code, a language of gifts and glances, small enough to hide in a sleeve, yet large enough to keep a lonely soul warm on nights when the walls closed in. So, as you drift further into this quiet world, imagine the weight of a folded note, the rough touch of carved wood hidden in a pocket, the soft tickle of ribbon at a wrist. These tiny symbols, so fragile, carried whole futures inside them, futures that might never come to be but offered. For a while, the sweet taste of hope, in a world where matches were made by coin and kin. A simple ribbon could feel like rebellion or salvation. A dream tucked between the pages of a prayer book, waiting to be found by candlelight, long after the house had gone to sleep. Let the candle burn lower now. The hush of the village grows thicker in the small hours, when secrets slip out like mice beneath a door. For in this world where courtship is watched so closely, bargained, bartered, arranged, there is always the whisper of forbidden love threading through the rafters like wood smoke. Imagine a pair of lovers, hearts pulled toward each other in defiance of every rule. Perhaps they grew up side by side, sharing chores and laughter at the edge of the fields. Or perhaps they met in the brief freedom of a midsummer fair, a stolen kiss behind the ale tent, binding them more surely than any vow. But their families stand opposed, too poor, too distant in rank, too tangled in old grudges to ever approve. By day they steal glances across the village green, careful as cats in the sun. But when darkness settles over thatched roofs, they slip into the hush outside, through orchard rows, across muddy tracks, down to the hedgerow that shields them from prying eyes. There, in the half-moon's glow, hands tremble as they pass tokens back and forth, a promise wrapped in ribbon, a dream whispered into the still night air. Yet secrets rarely stay secret in a place where gossip is the village's second heartbeat. A neighbor might hear footsteps in the orchard, the low murmur of voices through the hedge. A jealous rival might see the shadow of two figures when only one ought to be there. And once suspicion catches hold, it spreads like a frost that kills the tender shoots of a spring field. Rumors coil around the lovers like brambles. A girl's reputation, so fragile, can be snapped in an instant. She may be called before the moral courts, forced to swear an oath that she is untouched, her family's honor hanging on the trembling truth of her words. If she is found with child, the scandal grows sharp and punishing. A father might disown her. A brother might force the boy at knife point to make an honest woman of her, whether he loves her or not. Sometimes the church steps in, offering penance for sins that have already taken root. A couple caught in the shadows might find themselves married in haste at the church porch, bells ringing not with joy but with the cold finality of obligation. The wedding feast, if there is one, tastes of shame rather than celebration. Among the wealthier, scandal might spill into the courts of the powerful. Imagine a young noblewoman caught in an affair with a household knight, their letters discovered, their tokens laid out like evidence upon a heavy oak table. A father's rage may lock her behind the thick walls of a convent, her days from then on spent in the silence of stone cloisters. The knight, if he is lucky, may find himself banished to the furthest reaches of his lord's lands, or worse, strung up as a warning to any who forget the boundaries of duty. Yet even so, the human heart has a way of flowering through stone. Tales are told of lovers who refused to bow. They fled under starlight, hand in hand down muddy roads, taking only the clothes on their backs and the stubborn hope that somewhere, far from gossip and kin, they could forge a life of their own. Some made it, the folk stories say, and their names live on in the ballads sung by wandering minstrels. Others found only hardship, hunger, and the harsh justice of a world that would not bend. And for every reckless escape, countless more ended quietly, a final meeting behind the church wall, tears slipping down, cheeks roughened by wind and work. A promise made to love each other in the next life, perhaps before each turned back to their waiting families. The orchard gate, closing like a sigh behind them, so drift deeper into this hush and listen for the heartbeat beneath the layers of duty and fear, even when the rules press down like a millstone, even when the threat of scandal shadowed every glance, people still risked it. For in that risk lay the faintest hope that love might, just might, slip through the brambles and bloom in the hidden corners where no rumor could follow. Imagine now the heavy wooden door of a village church, its iron hinges creaking as it swings open on a Sunday morning. The hush inside is deep, broken only by the shuffle of worn boots on stone and the soft clearing of throats as the faithful take their places, women on one side, men on the other. Sunlight filters through stained glass, casting jeweled patches on rough wool cloaks and work-hardened hands. In this place, love, or at least the bonds that bound one life to another, was not a private matter. The church held the keys to the doors of marriage, penance, and forgiveness. It watched with an unblinking eye, shaping who could wed, who must not, and who would be punished when the old rules were broken. Picture the priest at the front, his voice echoing through the nave as he reads the banns of marriage, the public announcement that a couple intends to wed. 3 Sundays in a row, the banns must be called out, giving the whole village ample time to object. Perhaps someone knows of a secret vow already made, a cousin too close in blood, a promise broken. In another parish, the words hang in the air like a net, catching secrets that lovers would rather keep hidden. The church's rules ran deeper than any family's gossip. Certain unions were strictly forbidden. Cousins too close, godparents and godchildren, those bound by spiritual kinship. In an age when bloodlines were muddled and family trees tangled like hedgerows, it was not uncommon to discover that the person you hoped to marry was off limits. A dispensation might be purchased if one had coin and favor enough. But for most, a forbidden match was the end of a dream, and if you slipped, if the rules bent in the hush of orchard shadows or under the cover of festival darkness, the penance could be harsh. Imagine kneeling on the cold stone floor of that same church, a penitent's cloak draped over your shoulders. The villagers gather behind you, their murmurs a soft, relentless tide. A woman might be forced to confess her sin aloud, that she had lain with a man not her husband. A man might be made to stand beside her, head bowed, the weight of his crime pressed into every knot of the wooden cross he must carry through the village square. Yet the church did not only punish, it guided and guarded, too. Marriage was a holy sacrament, a bond that must be entered freely, in theory at least. Priests were meant to ensure that no bride was forced, no groom dragged unwilling to the altar. But reality often told another story. Whispered threats, veiled promises, and the silent pressure of family need made many a yes, a word spoken with trembling lips. Even after the wedding, the church's watchfulness did not wane. A couple might find their bedding blessed by a priest, witnessed by family who crowded the chamber to see that the marriage was truly consummated. A child born too soon after the wedding raised eyebrows and questions, and a priest's sharp eye might turn to confessions that dug deeper than any plow dot beyond the parish churches. The great cathedrals echoed with these same concerns, though their love and marriage were entangled with power. Bishops and abbots wrote letters settling disputes over dowries and inheritance, carefully weighing the balance of family honor and church law. Monks copied old canon law into heavy tomes, each page a reminder that, from the humblest peasant to the wealthiest noble, no one slipped entirely from the church's reach. And yet, for all its strictness, the church was sometimes a sanctuary for those with no other refuge. Lovers who fled the wrath of families might claim sanctuary within a church's walls, trusting that for 40 days, at least, they could not be dragged out by force. Some found a sympathetic priest willing to marry them in secret, binding them in God's eyes, even if the world outside disapproved. So imagine the hush of the church at midnight, candles guttering low. A young couple kneels side by side before a weary priest. Their hands tremble as they join them together, as a soft blessing is murmured over vows spoken in whispers. Outside, the night waits, heavy with the threat of discovery. But here, in this sacred hush, love for a moment stands apart from scandal and shame as dawn creeps through the narrow windows. The church's watchful eye turns outward again. The village wakes, gossip stirs, and the old rules gather themselves like ravens on a wall. And beneath it all, the human heart beats its quiet plea that love might survive the judgments, the bans, the penance, and find, somehow, its own place to rest. Picture now the rough edge of the village, past the narrow lanes lined with thatched roofs, past the manor's fenced pasture, out to the low cottages where the humbler folk live. Here, the walls are wattle and daub, the floors packed earth, and the hearth burns low, fed with scraps of firewood gathered at the forest's edge. 4 peasants. The rules of courtship and marriage weighed heavy, but hunger and survival often pressed heavier still. Love, if it came, was a fragile luxury tucked between the cold chores of life, carrying water, tending thin sheep, weeding the Lord's fields. Imagine a young woman, sleeves rolled, fingers red and raw from scouring clothes in the icy stream. She glances up, just once, to see the plowman's boy working the next field over. The steam rising from the oxen like ghosts in the early light. A moment like that, a smile. Between them and even the simplest promise. A peasant girl's parents watch carefully, for they know how easily the family's good name could crumble under rumor. One mistake could mean shame that lingers like a stain in the thatch. And if she's already promised elsewhere, even a single slip behind the haystack could ruin her chance at a marriage that keeps food on the table come winter. In some places, a village court, a gathering of elders, neighbors, and the reeve, kept a close watch on betrothals. These small courts dealt out fines for fornication, promises broken, or children born out of wedlock. The penances could be harsh, but the real punishment lay in the whispers that followed. The suspicion that a family's daughters were too free with their laughter, or that a lad was no man of his word. Dowries were meager here, sometimes a cow, or a few hens, or a patch of land tilled for a lord in exchange for permission to marry. Parents might stretch their hopes like a fraying cloak, praying the small dowry would be enough to secure a match that keeps hunger from the door. And so, a daughter might find herself promised to a man twice her age, a widower with 4 children who needs hands to work the garden, and a womb to bear more. Yet, even in these hard corners, the old stories flickered like embers. Village girls still slipped away to the green on May Day, ribbons in their hair. Young men still carved tokens by firelight when the day's work was done. A promise might be made under the boughs of an ancient oak, a place where elders said spirits watched and protected those bold enough to risk the village's gossip. But what choice did they really have? For the poor, a match was more than love. It was the thin line between enough to eat and not enough, between a warm hearth and the bitter draught that howls through holes in the thatch. Boy, but wake to find herself wed to a man who brings a goat and a promise of next season's grain. Still, there were moments of kindness, 2 glimpses of something softer amid the bramble of duty and need. A peasant couple who weathered lean harvests together might, over time, find comfort in their shared burdens. They'd rise each dawn to gather kindling, plant turnips side by side, raise children who would inherit the same patch of soil. There, love might not be the stuff of troubadour songs, but it would settle like warm straw against the cold. So, listen to the crackle of the hearth in that humble cottage. Imagine the murmured dreams traded in hushed voices when the children sleep. For the peasant's heart, marriage is often not a choice made freely, yet sometimes, against the odds, it grows into something that. Now, draw your mind away from the smoke-scented village hearths and up the winding road to the manor house, or higher still, to the echoing stone keep of a minor noble family. The air here is colder, the floors flagged in stone rather than packed earth, and the walls hang with tapestries meant to keep out the draught. In this world, the language of love is spoken not in whispers by the hedgerow, but in the careful murmur of alliances, bloodlines, and wealth. Picture a young noblewoman, her hair combed smooth, her gown stiff with embroidery that took her mother's maids months to finish. She sits by the high window in her father's hall, fingers wrapped around a piece of parchment, not a love letter, but a copy of a betrothal agreement. She reads her own name there, alongside that of a man she has never met, perhaps a distant cousin, perhaps the son of a powerful neighbor who holds lands that her father covets. In this world, marriage is not just a bond between 2 souls, it is the binding of acres, the fusing of rivers and mills, the knotting together of 2 family crests in ink and seal wax. Love, if it comes, must wait its turn. The contract comes first. A noble father weighs his daughter's future with the same care he gives to the yield of his orchards. Whom she marries might bring him new grazing lands, the protection of a stronger house, or a share in a lucrative trade route. And so, a girl might find herself promised at 12 or 14, betrothed by proxy, the contract sealed with rings, exchanged by messengers. The marriage consummated years later when she's deemed old enough to bear heirs. Imagine the grand wedding when it comes. A noble wedding is a pageant of status. The great hall hung with banners, the tables heavy with roasts and pastries. Troubadours sing soft verses about courtly love, even as the couple sits side by side, glancing at each other like strangers at market. Gifts pass hands, bolts of fine cloth, silver goblets, a dowry chest filled with linen and coins, all tokens that love must learn to grow around, like ivy twisting through stone. For noble sons, the burden is just as heavy. A second or third son might hope for a love match, but the heir, the one who stands to inherit the keep and fields, cannot choose freely. His marriage must bind families together, heal old feuds, strengthen fragile truces. A lord might spend months at court, negotiating with other landholders, whispering promises of his son's hand in exchange for the return of a disputed meadow or the loyalty of a minor knight. And still, within these cold stone walls, hearts beat in secret. Picture the lady who finds herself drawn to a traveling bard, his song stirring in her something her arranged match never could. Or the young squire who longs for the daughter of a neighboring baron, though his father has already chosen a wealthier bride for him. Their longing must bloom like a flower pressed between the pages of a book, hidden, delicate, easily crushed. Sometimes these secret loves slip through the cracks. A noble woman might bear a child that is not her husband's, a scandal that, if discovered, could cost her everything. Or a young knight might fight a duel for the honor of a lady whose hand he cannot win. Troubadours would weave these tales into ballads sung for generations, softening the bitter truth into poetry, that noble love, when it dared to defy duty, was often a tragedy in disguise. And yet, some found contentment within the bargain. Over time, a lord and lady, bound first by duty, might grow into each other's company, finding comfort in shared burdens and the steady birth of heirs to carry on the name. They might stand together in the great hall, watching their children play near the hearth, the echo of their own youthful longing dulled, but not entirely lost. So listen for the hush in these stone corridors, the rustle of silk skirts, the clink of goblets, the soft footfalls of servants passing news from room to room. Beneath the cold banners and the painted shields on the walls, the old rules hold firm. Lands must be joined, alliances forged, bloodlines secured. Love, if it comes at all, must learn to live like a candle flame, flickering, hidden, but never quite snuffed out by the draught that sweeps through the great hall's open door. And now, with the hearth burning low and the night grown still, we come to the echoes, the lingering traces of all those tangled, careful, fragile bonds that wound through the medieval world like ivy through old stone walls. Picture a village, green at dawn, empty but for the worn track around the maypole. Here, 100 May days have come and gone, dancers weaving bright ribbons that told the same old story, youth daring a glance across the circle, fingers brushing in defiance of watchful parents, promises whispered just beyond the reach of a priest's ear. Though the music has faded, the echoes of those moments remain, a ribbon tucked away in a chest, a half-forgotten love song handed down like a family recipe in the old manors and keeps, where coats of arms still hang above arched doorways. You can almost hear the footsteps of the daughters and sons who married for land, duty, or alliance. Their stories live on in musty parchments, charters, betrothal records, dowry lists carefully penned in fading ink. Yet, if you look beyond the lines of coin and acre, you might sense the shadows of softer truths. A widow who chose not to remarry so her children could inherit freely. A nobleman who defied a father's wishes to wed a woman of lesser birth for love alone. And then there were the ones who vanished into rumor. The lovers who fled to distant towns, never to be seen again except in the ballads sung by traveling minstrels. Songs that speak of moonlit trysts in orchards, of secret tokens exchanged beneath the hedgerow, of promises made at the risk of scandal and ruin. They remind us that, for all its chains and bargains, medieval love was never just a ledger. It was a quiet rebellion against a world that weighed everything in land, coin, and name. These stories drifted down the centuries, woven into the way we still speak of courtship, of announcing intentions before witnesses. These threads stretch back to thatched villages and stone churches where banns were reed and neighbors whispered behind cupped hands. Yet, thankfully, time wore down the harshest edges. No longer must most hearts bend to the ledger's cold math or the village court's gossip. Today, we can stand where they stood and feel the faint pulse of gratitude for what's changed, the freedom to choose, to say yes or no without fear of scandal, to slip a ribbon into a loved one's hand without watching for the reeve's shadow. So, as you settle deeper into the hush of sleep, picture that ancient orchard again. The moon hangs low over the hedgerow, where countless footsteps pressed down the grass long ago. Hear the soft hush of distant voices, the faint promise that in every rigid rule, every bargain struck, every marriage arranged, there always lived the hope that love might break through, stubborn as wildflowers pushing through stone. May you carry that echo with you into the dreams that wait, the gentle truth that even in the hardest times, the heart finds its quiet rebellion, its tender courage, its hidden ribbon tucked away where no watchful eye can find it. Sleep well, knowing that the worst nightmares of medieval courtship have passed, and that somewhere in the hush of old fields and forgotten orchards, the softest dreams still bloom, waiting to be found again.